What can you tell us about the early signing day, Caleb, and where the Vols stand as they assemble the vast majority of their 2025 class? Now, I think when they went with the early signing day in the beginning, you thought that some guys would sign early. I've always argued it should be in August, but so you get the for sure guys on campus. But this one now gets lost in the shuffle of the college football playoff. But despite that, this signing class is pretty darn good. And I know there's some. Did you say you had some breaking news on it as well?
Yeah, a little bit of news. Okay, guys, don't freak out. Tennessee has dropped on signing day they had dropped from 7th to 9th once Lagonza Hayward decommitted. Now, on signing day itself, they have dropped to number 14 because of pickups. They are now in the SEC. They're now behind Georgia, Alabama, Texas, LSU, Oklahoma, Auburn, and Florida. But things are not done as we do this segment. What happened was Tennessee suffered a decommitment from a St. Francis Academy defensive lineman, Baltimore defensive lineman, Darian Smith, who had committed to Tennessee in late July, flipped from Tennessee to Auburn. Darian Smith is a 3-star on 247 Sports composite. Again, I don't want to give this too much away because we're going to talk about it tomorrow, but I will say that Tennessee, as of Wednesday at noon, lost this commitment, but is pursuing a 4-star defensive lineman at the same time, who is much more highly touted in Isaiah Campbell. The other point that I want to bring up is this. The freak out over David Sanders flipping. David Sanders has not signed as of noon on Wednesday for the early signing period. However, Steve Wiltfong at On 3 is reporting that there is nothing to worry about with his commitment, that he is pretty much going to go to Tennessee. We will find out. Obviously, we will cover that as it happens. Now, the Darian Smith loss, it's weird that drops Tennessee too much. I think other teams made plays, but I will say Darian Smith plays at St. Francis Academy. That is a Christian school, and who wouldn't want to go play for a great Christian like Hugh Freeze? Of course, he just wants to play for the moral man.
I will tell you this. That was part of my area in the Baltimore, D.C. area, and those kids flipped a lot. And I think it's because a lot of them wanted to come to the South. I thought Eddie Goldman was going to end up at Tennessee, and he ended up at Florida State. And there was another young man that ended up
Marvin Austin.
Yeah. So that happens because they don't have allegiances. And the other thing is it's easy to fly in there to Baltimore or DC.
There's 3 airports.
Yeah. So they can get hammered by these. That doesn't sound right. They can get recruited constantly by these coaches. So I think you can flip guys. Yeah, I think Eddie Goldman, who's now playing in the NFL, I thought was going to end up at Tennessee until he told me the morning of his announcement so I could pre-write the story. And I said, who is it? He goes, Florida State. I'm like, okay. He didn't have a country accent. That made no sense. That was like one of Caleb's voices. I'll tell you this, that Tennessee, I used to have a saying that Caleb and I could get Tennessee a top 25 class because of all the facilities that go with it. And especially now with the NIL that goes with it, could get Tennessee probably a top 20 or top 15 class. I'm not backing off of that, but I will say this. You don't have to have a top 5 class anymore, because that's why people at one point they got excited with Butch Jones. What was his highest rated class, Caleb?
It was 4th nationally.
Okay, so that's good. But his other ones were what? Low teens, and he had like a 9, I think.
Yep. Well, no, he had 2 back-to-back top 5 classes. He had back-to-back top 5 classes. And then that was his 2nd and 3rd year. His first 2 full recruiting classes were top 5 classes. And that's why everybody bought into Butch Jones so early, by the way, because he was recruiting so well.
Now, let me make sure that everybody knows. Butch Jones would call recruiting analysts and have them add a star after they committed to Tennessee. That's what he did. And he would try to strong arm reporters into doing that with practice access or lack thereof.
Many times before they would commit to Tennessee, but he knew they were committing. He would have them add a star.
Exactly. So if they were like a quiet commitment. So is this class good enough? I'm going to tell you what I think, and I've covered recruiting for a number of years. why I believe it is. Last Look brought to you by Doctors Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn.
The first step to better vision is to visit ccteyes.com. The information you need is easy to access, and setting an appointment is as simple as clicking the tab. Doctors Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn, and Eye Care Optical at ccteyes.com.
Okay, I would have told you a few years ago, before NIL and the transfer portal, that you could not win a national championship with a top 15 recruiting class at Tennessee, nor any other SEC school for that matter. You probably couldn't even win the SEC unless you found a Cam Newton. But I don't believe that anymore. I believe you have to be more than respectable, which is 10, 12, somewhere in there, and we'll see where Tennessee gets to. But you have to be more than respectable in high school football recruiting. But you have to realize that the transfer portal and the NIL arrangements that can be made to bring guys over is a monstrous shift in the sport. You do not have to be like Alabama or Georgia, who will probably end up with the 1 or 2 class year in and year out. Well, at least under Nick Saban, they would have. And with Kirby Smart, Georgia is going to be right up there as well. Josh Heupel is doing it in a different way. And I respect this way. It's not like he's mailing in high school football recruiting. But now I believe Tennessee can be a little bit more picky. And I believe that Tennessee can say, I want you and you and you, but I would have taken you a couple of years ago, but not with the transfer portal. We talked about the secondary a little bit earlier. Let's remember that this secondary that was a part of one of the elite defenses in the nation, as we all called it. Let's remember that those dudes were not high school football recruits for the University of Tennessee. They were not, other than, I guess, Will Brooks?
Yeah, you're right. Probably.
And that you can't flip a complete roster, but you can flip a secondary, and you can go out, and we've seen other teams go get a quarterback. Not that Tennessee needs that. So I think the way that Josh Heupel is handling it, not to just kiss up to our listeners nor him, I think it's pretty incredible. I think it's pretty smart, and I think it's really ahead of the game. And I give him big time kudos for that. Now, go ahead.
Well, I also want, as we're talking about this right now, I want to give some breaking news that happens in the moment as we're speaking. But Timothy Merritt, who was committed to Miami, the Vols were targeting him after Lagonza Hayward flipped. He has officially flipped from Miami to Tennessee, literally right now as we've been talking about this, which is going to push Tennessee back up to the 12 range probably. He's a defensive back, very, very, very solid one. One of those he's a 3-star, Dave, but he's one of those 3-stars that was just a late bloomer and was identified late, but is actually really good. He's a 6'2", 180-pound cornerback outside of Birmingham. That is exactly the type of size you want at a cornerback. Recruited by Tim Banks, signed by Tim Banks. If he was recruited by Tim Banks and he committed, then that actually throws cold water on my theory that Tim Banks may be getting a head coaching job somewhere else. And potentially maybe Tim Banks just preferred him to Lagonza Hayward. We don't know.
Well, I'll tell you this. I definitely think there was negative recruiting. Whether or not you're right, whether or not Tim Banks had an offer, I can guarantee you, and that other recruiters were using it against him, whether or not it's true. It doesn't matter if it's true in recruiting.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. It really doesn't. I mean, that's a great point.
You just throw it out there. I mean, they did this to Trooper Taylor when he got 3 guys out of South Florida. Every other college football recruiter said he's cheating. He wasn't.
And what's more important now is that you talk about recruiting rankings, the talent composite matters way more than the recruiting rankings. The talent composite is the 247 Sports Talent Composite, where they take the recruiting rankings and the transfer portal rankings of everybody on your team and just rank you at the beginning of each year. But Dave, because of parity, even that's less relevant now than it used to be. So, I mean, you're right. In general, recruiting has just totally changed. But it was always flawed back in the day, because you bring up Butch Jones. Not only did he call people and demand that they put a higher star next to their name, but he took players at positions where playing that position kept them at a 5-star, but they were overvalued. And we talk about Jalen Hurd, should have been a defensive end, but Jones took him to play running back as a 5-star. Khalil McKenzie should have been an offensive lineman. Butch Jones took him as a defensive lineman because that's where he was a 5-star. That was to inflate the recruiting rankings too.
It's a great point. You know, he told a couple of guys that, hey, you can play the position you want. I've told you the Jalen Hurd Alabama story, right?
Where Nick Saban told him he could be an NFL defensive end.
I mean, they're sitting in the living room, and Nick Saban said, you're not a running back, you're an edge rusher. And that's boom. That's when it changed. That's when Alabama could have had him if Nick Saban would have lied to him. But if you do that, then you open up a whole Pandora's box of chemistry issues on your team. Because in that guy, I can give you names. Guys that played, you could probably guess one. Guys that played fullback instead of running back. And I can give you names of guys that were not happy that affected team chemistry much more than a guy like Kelly Washington. Much more. And it's because they were promised things in recruiting and they didn't end up getting it. And I believe.
Well, during the Kelly Washington era, Tennessee's fullback, if you're talking who I think you're talking about, he would have been a horrible running back.